Anyway, thank
All
you
right.
for coming
Cheers,
today.
mate. How you doing?
And it's an honor to have you on board, Prash.
Oh, thanks, man.
So I just want to give a bit of context to the audience for this video. I think a lot of students and stuff have heard your name and stuff before. You teach like a lot of civil engineering subjects, and
Yeah.
specifically nowadays, it's like the structural ones.
Yes.
Back in the day, you might have taught like
It was
fluids
across
and
the shop. Yeah.
yeah, just like
Yeah.
a bunch of different stuff. And then you finished your PhD recently as well in
Yes.
December, is it?
Oh, when I submitted? I submitted my thesis in September, I think.
Yeah, and you were telling me it just got approved like 2 days ago or something.
Yeah, in principle,
Yeah.
with minor corrections. Yeah, the
Yeah,
examiners
yeah.
got back, so
Well,
it's good.
congratulations for that.
Thanks, man.
And then, and you told me on a message that you've been teaching for 10 years now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
10
That's-
years.
That's
That's
really
right.
exciting. And so I want to ask you, like,
Yeah.
where did your teaching journey kind of begin?
Okay.
And, like, firstly, I guess, like, as a student, so I
Mm.
think people don't really know, like, where you grew up and stuff like that. And
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Singapore. So I was born in Singapore.
Mhm.
And I came to Australia for year 12.
Mm.
Yeah. And then I went back to 2 years for military, and then I came back, and that's when I started in Perth,
Mm.
went back for national service in Singapore, and then I swapped over to Sydney.
Mm.
So I came into UNSW in second year,
Yeah.
and then followed all the way through. But teaching, to answer your question,
Yes,
I
yes.
think this might sound a bit strange. I think I've always wanted to be a teacher, to be honest. It started by me first teaching myself. I remember when I was in Singapore and in like primary school or like early high school, I'd like force my parents to like buy like a whiteboard, and like plonk it in the room, and like all the markers by the side, and then I would be like kind of half studying, half like doodling on the whiteboard. But then
Yeah.
but if I was studying, the only way I could pay attention and study was if I'd take my book out and teach myself.
Damn.
So I'd like write on the board, and I'd go to school and I'd see the teachers doing it and be like, yeah, okay, so I'll do the same thing at home, and I'll stand in front of a whiteboard and I'll like teach myself. So yeah, it's strange. That's how it all like kind of started, which is why in a weird way, I don't think I didn't used to be like comfortable public speaking, but somehow or another, if I'm in a classroom and I turn around and I face the board and I'm just looking at the board and I'm writing, I'm very like at home.
Oh, that's nice.
Because I've always
that's how you
done that.
studied
Yeah,
as
but
well.
then every now and then I'll like turn around and face everyone and be like, my God, so many people looking at me, like, yeah.
Did you think that you were going to be a high school teacher originally? Because I feel like when you are in primary school, high school, you don't realize that like university teaching is like
Never.
an option, right?
No, I want. Yeah, that was a point. I think I was like, oh yeah, it'd be cool to teach in high school. But I think at the same time, you start going through high school and then you graduate, and then to become a high school teacher, especially in Singapore anyway, there's a very specific like trajectory you'd have to take.
Oh really?
What's
that?
with going to like a particular education institution and getting specific qualifications there to be qualified to come back and teach, and so something similar to like in other countries, I think they call it like a teacher training college. That's something similar you'd have in Singapore. So I decided, by the time I was that age, I was like, no, it's all right. I'll just like continue like everyone else and go figure out what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I would always so when I started teaching in 2014, I believe.
Yeah.
2014 is when I started teaching. That was like just private tutoring.
Yeah, private tutoring, right?
Yeah, in Australia, and then in Singapore, I did some more private tutoring. And then I think I only started doing the classes when I came here. Yeah.
And private tutoring was like one-on-one?
One-on-one.
Like group?
No, so it was one-on-one. And then in second year, I was doing private tutoring one-on-one. Then when I went to third year, that was the first time I was like in
teaching a
full
full
class. Yeah.
I remember you said to me once that like the classes used to be smaller, or there used to be like 2 teachers.
Yes.
Or something back in the day. They changed that now, right?
Yes.
Now one teacher has to teach like 40 kids.
Fun, yeah. But
like
back in the day, it was like 20 students and there are 2 teachers.
Yeah, it's like.
So like we were even wondering like how to split the workload, So I remember my first few classes, I'd teach like me and like one of my friends. The two of us were chosen to be like tutors for. I remember what it was. It was mechanics of solids. And it wasn't even like an Eng subject at UNSW back then. It was like CVEN 2301.
So it's just for
301 or
civil
something like that.
school.
It was just civil, yeah.
So it's easier, I guess.
Yeah, well, simpler, I guess.
Okay,
It was
sure.
run simpler.
Right.
Yeah, but we would do a thing where if we were like, okay, we're going to teach 3 questions, I'll do 1 question, and then the other tutor will do 2 questions or something like that. That's what it used to be.
And you're still paid like prep hours and whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
good.
So I mean, I think the pay was basically doubled, like for
Yeah.
class,
Yeah.
for because you had two people there.
Oh, I
Yeah,
see,
so that's
I
why it
see.
used to be like, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. We'll come back to the
Sure.
tutoring thing.
Sure.
I just don't want to get too carried away with that yet.
Okay.
But I guess so. You mentioned, yeah, when you were little, you kind of had the whiteboard. You were kind of teaching yourself and stuff like that. What drew you specifically to like mechanical and structural engineering, and then like teaching that eventually?
Yeah. I never actually seriously considered doing engineering until like much later.
Really?
Like when I was yeah, because there was a lot of other things I wanted to do. Like there was one point where I was just like super into media, and I wanted to be like a filmmaker.
Yeah, like setting up today, I guess. Right?
Yeah, with the cameras and everything. Yeah, like I was very much like, I think I wanted to be a director, and then I was like, messing around with like music, and I wanted to do a bit of that. I was kind of like all over the shop, to be honest. I think when it came to studying, at the time, I think I wanted to just do my own thing, but then like, family and stuff were like, no, I think you should like get a degree, which in hindsight is probably a good idea. Yeah. But then I was like, towards the tail end of my schooling in Singapore, I think I started to excel in physics.
Okay.
That's where it started, and it was all like force-based stuff, So like, whatever, if it had anything to do with like forces, like any Newtonian type physics, that was like easier for me. And then the electricity stuff, volts and amps, and I'm like, oh man, this is
a bit lost there.
I do get a bit lost. So when it came to deciding, I was like, okay, so engineering, that was what I wanted to do. When I was picking which type of engineering, it came down to me I did like a general engineering degree in UWA in Perth.
Sure. Yeah.
So I hadn't decided at that stage that I wanted to do civil. And then eventually when I had to choose like a specialty, when I was like doing my national service in Singapore and I came over to UNSW, you had to like choose a path now.
Yeah.
That's when I was like kind of lost, because I was like, oh, I didn't really know what to pick. And it boiled down to, after having conversations with like quite a few people, it boiled down to, what did I find easiest? Because I think it's easier to like something that you're relatively comfortable with and good at. Like, you wouldn't want to kind of bark up the wrong tree, and try to make something, force yourself to make something work. So the easiest subject for me was UWA's version of Eng 1300. And I was just like, yeah, like trusses, and like I was like, that was easy, like everything else was super hard,
Did that one have like dynamics and whatever as well?
It was basically, it's a carbon copy of like Eng 1300 basically.
Right. Yeah. I assume
the dynamics part, well, I was like, like you start bringing in,
you
like,
didn't love it.
I didn't love it. The part that came easy was, you draw a beam, and then you calculate a bending moment here, and I was just like asking around people. I was like, what subject is this? Like, which specialty is this?
Yeah, right.
Which is funny now in hindsight, because looking back, people could have said anything. They could have been like, oh yeah, bending moments show up in aerospace engineering. Which is true, like, it shows up in mechanical engineering, but somehow whoever I spoke to was like, that's structural engineering, that this is civil. And I was like, oh, okay. Then I was like, okay, so like, what do civil engineers do? I honestly, I was pretty blurred at that point. I had no idea. And when I was asking people, and they're like, oh, I design buildings and whatever. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
A large part of, I guess, like civil engineering is the bending moment diagrams and the force calculations. But did you find the material science stuff like relatively easy to understand as well?
No, that took a while.
Is it because of the chemistry and whatever?
Yeah. So I mean, I was pretty hopeless at like everything else, but just the force stuff was pretty all right. And I think by that stage I was like, okay, I think structures is pretty cool. So when I started at UNSW, it's civil engineering, but at that stage already I was like, yeah, structures. I think I wasn't super sure yet. And then you go through the years and you start doing all these other subjects, and then I was like, fluid mechanics,
it's rough.
Bit of a mind workout, and then soils, I was like, oh God, you know. Although, I mean, it's funny, having taught like over years now, and you know, you meet students doing different things. Like I'll talk to a student and I'll be like, oh, so you're doing structures, right? And they'll be like, nah, man, I'm doing like geotech. And I'm like, what? You know?
What's wrong
but
with
I
you?
realized, yeah. But I mean, you know, I think it's just a matter of what people like, which is what you're naturally like kind of more inclined to at the end of the day. I think that's the only usable advice I can give.
Yeah,
is
sure.
I was leaning into what I was good at, and I think people should lean into what they're more comfortable with. Don't like I think it's a waste barking up the wrong tree. That's it.
Yeah. Do you reckon your like teaching philosophy has changed over time?
Yeah,
I guess
for sure.
Like for example, you're talking about how you lean towards lean towards physics. Like personally, I'm not great at maths, but I'm also not great at teaching maths. It seems like quite abstract. And like, were there any strategies that you kind of used to explain physics or whatever?
Yeah, I think this came to my advantage. I don't pick up concepts quickly. Like it takes me a while. It's funny, like you guys should have seen me like when I was studying at uni. It's crazy because like my friends would like sit down and watch like a lecture at like 2 times speed or 1.5 times speed. So like if it's a 2-hour lecture, they've got their notes and everything done in like an hour and a half in real time, you know. Whereas for me, I would also be watching at 1.5 times speed, but I remember my time multiplier was times 2. So if it's like a 2-hour lecture, I'll only properly finish that lecture after 4 hours. And it's 4 hours of work. So if I ever get like distracted in the middle, it'll be like 6 hours or something. Oh, yeah. You know, like, you know, because you're never actually focused for like 4 hours. And the reason that was the case was because and this is also why I never attended lectures live. And it's not because I didn't want to, I was lazy. I was living on campus and I had all the time in the world. I could totally come. The problem was, like, I would be trying to understand what the lecturer was saying. And if I lost, if at any point I lost I got lost in the lecture and I like didn't understand like one of the links, the rest of the lecture was like gone. And I think that was why when I was in school, I wasn't a very good student, because if I like didn't understand like a particular progression of like logic, the rest of the lesson was a waste.
Right.
You know, I would kind of just be like pretending at that stage to be like, oh yeah, no, I get that, but I really didn't. You know. And so when I go back, and the beauty about a recorded lecture is you can pause. Like I often did this, I'd pause and I'd sit back and I'd just be like, why did he say that, or why did she say that? You know, like what did they mean? And then when I understand it, I would write it in my own words.
Oh, right.
And when I taught it the way I understood it, which is why usually in a class, it doesn't sound the same as what like a lecturer would teach, or what the lecturers were teaching when I learned it. Because when I'm teaching it in class, it's how I understood it.
Right.
You know,
the lecturers like to use a lot more technical kind of.
Yeah, and I also understand that, because now after you've stopped being a student, you get further and further away from the experience of what it was like to learn it for the first time.
Yeah,
and
I can relate.
Yeah, and you know what I mean. And when you start explaining things, as you get more advanced, when you start explaining things, you explain things in new ways that you find might make people understand better. But there is a bit of a disconnect that's happening there.
Yeah.
You know, so I remember like as I started working in structural engineering and stuff like that, the way I started to explain simple concepts changed. But there was a point when I realized that wasn't working, and I had to kind of go back to what I used to say, and people connected with that a lot better. It's just because I'm using like, you know, whatever lessons I learned as a student. Yeah. And I think that helps students, and then eventually people kind of evolve, and you know, their understanding will change.
Yeah, I have a friend called Dom. These guys know him. Yeah. He likes to use the word like tradey language.
Yes.
Like, can you explain that again, but using like tradey terminology?
Yeah.
So I can understand.
Yeah.
But yeah,
no, I get that for sure. Yeah.
In terms of like teaching again, is there anything you've picked up to help like motivate or engage your students like during the classes?
Yeah. This only case started towards the tail end. Like so at UNSW, what I would have been teaching for I think 7 years. I only started doing this towards the last like 2 or 3, which is asking questions in the class. Because I used to, I was quite timid in the beginning. Like I'd be great if you just like it's like I walk into class and I hit play and I'll do my whole spiel, and then I'll leave, and I'm like, I hope people understood that. But now, or to at least the last 2 or 3 years, because I found other teachers doing that, and I was like, oh, like, but I was scared that like if I ask a question, like it would fall on silence, and then eventually I started doing that, and it happened a couple of times, and then you get used to it a little bit, and then I realized that was what people really appreciated. Which if I ask like a point blank question in class, because I think it gets everyone like a bit more engaged. If they feel like, I guess, oh, this person's like walking around asking people questions, like like I started doing this thing where I think towards the tail end I was really comfortable with it. I'd like walk through the class and like just being like, what do you reckon?
Like pointing at people or or
no, not really, because I didn't want them to feel like they had to answer. But I would like when it's pin drop silence, I'd be like, okay, what do you think?
And
then I'll get them to like and even if they didn't answer, someone next to them would be like, oh, I think that. And it gets like a whole group of people like engaged, which I think was the most effective. And then I kind of regretted that I only did that towards the end. I should have done that from the beginning. Yeah.
If you had another 10 years to teach,
oh my god,
where you'd be.
I know, but I think I'd get bored with like a particular teaching style. It'll always change. Like you speak to a lecturer who's been teaching for like 10 years or something. In their 8th year, it'll be different from like in their 2nd or 3rd year. And I think you have to keep changing it. I think.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
The students.
I remember when I think you were teaching me steels, I kind of appreciated that you gave a lot of like real world examples, because you worked in industry for a little bit.
Yes.
Like how did that kind of change as you got more experience?
Yeah, that was a big help. Which is also why I started only teaching structural subjects after a while, because I mean I couldn't give I think the same kind of anecdotes if it was like fluid mechanics or something like that. So and those classes were like the favorite ones for me to teach, because people are genuinely like if I was teaching like a lesson in steels, I could be like, oh yeah, last week I did this at work, and it matches so well.
Like a real thing.
Exactly.
Connected with students, like oh, one day I might be doing this.
Yeah, which is why in a weird way I kind of preferred a little bit teaching like concrete and steels compared to say structural analysis, because structural analysis everyone's like going anyway. And especially mechanics of solids, if half the class was not doing civil, then I think that would have been like I'd kind of be like a bit bummed, because I'd be like, oh, then I couldn't share like civil related stories. But if I walk into a class and it's all steels or it's concrete, I'm very comfortable, because I'm like at the time I was working in that industry right then and there. So it helps a lot, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything, like any advice you'd give to new tutors who are like, I guess like stepping into university teaching for the first time? Like a few of these guys behind the camera, they might be doing like design or like fluid mechanics and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like what do you wish that you knew going into teaching? And maybe like just as an anecdote for myself, I wasn't prepared for the public speaking side of things.
Yeah.
like I wasn't good at public speaking either, and then like walking into a room, you have 40 students in front of you. Fuck.
No, I think no one ever warns you that that public speaking is a big part of teaching. I guess when the classes get bigger and bigger, you're like, huh, and then suddenly I had this moment where they put me like they scheduled a class in, but it was like in a lecture theater instead, and I was like, this is what the lecturers must feel like,
Yeah, true. They're probably used to it.
I think guess. As far as tips go, I'd say teaching it the way you've understood something is far more important than teaching what's in a slide or what's in a book, because where's the value add? You get what I mean? So like if there's slides available and there's like textbooks available, then why would you kind of reiterate that? And the problem is, I mean, if you've been in teaching for a while, I think you also realize, unfortunately, there is a big group of teachers who are kind of like, I think, riding the wave of, maybe that's not what they really wanted to do, but they're kind of doing it as a job.
Oh, that's true.
Like
PhD.
Or like some academics fundamentally are researchers, but then if the university requires them to teach, then that's like it's part and parcel of their job. But you can I think as a student you can kind of distinguish between someone who loves to teach and someone who is like just teaching. You know,
I can feel that without naming any specific lecturers or anything like that.
Yeah, but I mean, and the sad part, and I think the thing is, I don't think unless you love teaching, people generally, I think, might have a lower, like teachers in general, I think might have a pretty, like, say like an average standard of what they think a good teacher is, right? But it takes being exposed to an exceptional teacher for you to be like, wow, that you see, like that's where they've made that impact.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think like I've had some tremendous teachers, and you know I could tell right away like this person like really loves to teach. And so the other piece of advice I'd give is if you really love teaching, right, your main focus should not be on how well you understand the subject. Your main focus should be, how do I get this person I'm talking to or this group of people I'm talking to understand the subject. So your fundamental goal is to make sure as many people as you can understand well what you're discussing. And so for example, that means if you're teaching something that's complex, then it's your job to break it down into as little bite-sized bits as possible. And like one of the things I would do is, if say for example there's a big leap in logic in a particular class and I know I've got 2 hours to do it in, then I'll choose the questions that I do in class wisely. And sometimes, for example, if the lecturer is like, tutors, please cover like question 2, question 7 in today's shoot, like there were times that I'd go back to the lecturer and be like, can I do this one and that one instead? Because I feel there's a bit of a logic leap or something like that. And generally the lecturers are like, you know, if you're as a tutor, if you're going and they're like, no, I want to improve the class, they're super like, you know, they're really keen, and they're like, sure. You know, I don't know how many tutors would go back to the lecturer and be like, how do I improve the class? You know, but just like, I think it's a big deal. And I think students appreciate it, you know, especially if you've got a class of like 40 students. Even sometimes it's hard to comprehend how much impact you have as a teacher. So, yeah, and I think always just keeping the student first. And that can manifest in any form. So I'll give you another example. During COVID, so I was teaching 2018, 2019, and then 2020 COVID hit. When COVID hit, everything went online, right? And that's when I started creating the OneNotes. Because when I was teaching in class, it was all on the whiteboard. The problem with that was I couldn't share like, you know, the notes with anyone. But the OneNote was like a big unlock, because then you could share the notes with either students that came to your class or not, you know? So it came a point where I started like unlocking all the links, and I was like anyone can read it, go, you know, like share this far and wide as much as you want. And I would make those OneNotes outside of class time at work. After work, I remember like when I was still like interning, work would finish at like 5, and I'd hang around in the office for like an hour and a half, and I'd just spend that time making the OneNote and writing it in neat handwriting, because I knew people would read it, and you know they need to understand it.
Awesome.
I think any time you can put into just making sure that like that has to be a fundamental aim over and above, I think, what you kind of get in return, because the rewards of teaching are all at the end. You know, and it's a fulfillment that's more than I think what you can get paid at all. Like as a teacher, the driver is when someone comes and they're like, you know, I didn't understand this at all, and now I really enjoy it. Like I would do that for free. Like I would teach for free. You know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you ever read your like my experience stuff and like?
Yeah, and I
really like.
no, because I think it reaffirms. Firstly, it helps the lecturer being like, okay, I'll hire this person again for the following year, which is kind of what I was, you know. But it will help me as well, because, like, all that effort that goes into teaching, you'd like to know that it's paying off somehow, you know. And like I said, the rewards in teaching are all at the end, like towards the tail end. If students come up and be like, either they've understood it, or if they come up and they start asking you really good questions, that's like a little pat on the back for me, because I'm like, because you need a certain leap in logic to start asking more complicated questions. So if a student comes up who I know at the start of the term really didn't understand the subject,
Yeah.
And like in week 3 or week 4, they come up and they ask a really smart question.
It means they
That's
get it,
like,
yeah.
okay, no, we're getting somewhere, you know, like that effort's not for naught. So I would oftentimes like, and because I'm so driven by it, I would like, and you would know this, like I'd run a 2-hour class, and the class finishes. I'd love it when there's no other class to come and kick us out, because the students were like, everyone would stay and start asking questions, and it becomes like a bit of a you know, some sort of like Q&A kind of thing, and those are like that's the most fun. And I've gone like hours and hours. I remember there was one
Really?
like Q&A that lasted 2 hours. I'd be teaching for 4 hours,
Yeah.
and after the whole thing, I'd be like walk away so pumped, you know. Yeah. So that's awesome. I think that's what I'd say.
Actually, sorry, I'm just deviating.
Sure, go ahead.
No, fuck this thing. Yeah. Anyway, but like, is there any lecturers actually who like have made a big impact on you reckon?
For sure. My PhD supervisor, Hamid.
Yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah, he's very much he's driven very much by the same things I am driven by, which makes doing a PhD with him like a breeze, because we're both kind of like very same wavelength kind of people.
How would you describe his like teaching and I guess like work style and
he's very much he's there for the students, you know, like that's his number one priority, and you can see it in the effort that he puts in. What I'm surprised by is that he's been doing this for decades. You know, like I've been here for like a short amount of time compared to like, you know, the amount of effort he's been putting in. And he works incredibly hard, you know, for oftentimes, and he'll joke about like, oh, it's, you know, like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll always be working like this, you know, like on a hamster wheel or something like that. You know, he'd make jokes about it, but it takes a special kind of person to be driven to do something like that, you know. And his love for teaching, I think, is what I was very much inspired by. So he'd come to class, he'd make the nice notes, and the other thing I'd realized was I can't just love teaching and not be good at it, and good at the subject. So when I was a student in 4th year, I was kind of preparing to come back and teach the subject. So in a weird way, when I'm learning the subject and he was teaching, I wasn't only taking notes on the content, but I was like, what stories was he saying? How does he understand that so well, you know? How is he talking about one particular concept from 4 different angles, you know? And I was paying attention to what he would do in class that engaged everyone. And I would come and try and implement that when I started teaching.
Yeah.
Like in a weird, like I was taking notes in class for myself, but also neat enough to know that this notes will be used for like my students when I teach as well.
Yeah, I see.
So he was instrumental, you know, and I was only taught by Hamid, you know, in 4th year. So if you kind of scroll back before that, there was another teacher like Ehab, for example. Very
controversial, but I remember you
specific
saying,
way of teaching, but
good,
he worked for me because he had a very, like, I can liken it to this, right? If you have say you're the rabbit and someone's holding a carrot on a stick, right? Some teachers are really close to you with the carrot, you know, and they're like, you can take a big chunk now, I'm going to move a bit, and you can take another big chunk now, and it's a very comfortable process, right? And there are a lot of teachers who are like that. Also good teachers, just a different style.
Yeah.
You know, Hamid maybe is like slightly further away, but Hamid will like move towards you if you're struggling, you know. Ehab's like here.
There's no carrot.
There is a carrot. It's far away.
Oh, I see.
But it's one of those carrots where the promise is, if you can understand what he's saying at the speed at which he's saying it, it means you've got a really solid grasp. So it's like a higher level of understanding. And I think the leap in logic is further in his class, you know.
I would agree with that.
And maybe I'm not sure whether he had intended to design the class that way, because it very much is a choice, like on the lecturer's part. But I kind of took that as a challenge and being like, I so badly want to understand what he's saying, you know. Like he would, if he made like a small little throwaway comment, like in a lecture, and he was like, oh yeah, it's like this because XYZ, and it'd be one sentence. I'm one of those students who will stop and be like, why did he say that? How is that true? And I'd walk around and I'd kind of fiddle around and I'd be like, oh, that's why. and that would help a lot because a lot of the stuff that I learned in his classes, instructional analysis, is what I'd come and teach the class. I might present it in a slightly, like I'd be closer with I'd be closer with the carrot, and I would have chopped up the carrot into small pieces and like here, and then you can get that, and then I'll like lead them there. But the idea is the same. I think he taught things at like an advanced level that sometimes, if you were a structural engineer and you're working for a couple of years, if you went back to his lectures, you might appreciate it better.
I see.
The leap in logic for students might have been like slightly higher, but that was something that really, I think, pushed me to be like, structural analysis is like a deep well, and it's not. There's a lot of stuff you can find just at the surface and think you understand, but you can keep going further and further and further and learning new things all the time. And and another lecturer who made one of the biggest impacts on me, and he wouldn't know it because I never actually got the chance to tell him, was Mario Attard.
Oh, he was before Daniel O'Shea.
Yeah, Daniel came and took over all of Mario's classes. Yeah, so Mario used to teach me, and Daniel used to be a PTA when I was a student.
What's PTA, sorry?
Postdoctoral teaching assistant. They don't have PTAs now.
Sure.
Like PTAs were like teaching assistants at the lecturer level. So there'll be one PTA and like maybe 10 demonstrators or something. And so like you're the head honcho kind of demonstrator. So, and Daniel was that. But there was one thing that Mario said that made the biggest impact on me. It was like on an email before an exam to all the students. And he said, I'm giving everyone the solutions to all these past exams now, but please, and when you're practicing the past exams, don't look at the solutions, and he was giving tips. And in one of the tips he said, learning has to be a struggle.
It has to be.
Yeah. So and it was the way he put it. He said, to understand something at a deep level is a struggle. And I think he was kind of using that to try and motivate students to kind of, and I think he said something poignant that I'm probably going to butcher if I try to complete that sentence. But basically, I understood what he meant, like right then and there, because like I said, like watching a 2-hour lecture and taking 4 hours to complete it is so time consuming and it's so frustrating.
I agree.
And for me, understanding a new concept was a struggle,
So
because
related to you, like.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm like, when you fully understand a new concept, it means that if someone asks, it means you can explain it simply, in a simple manner. And if you can't explain something simply, it means you don't understand it well enough. And he said, and I remember experiencing that struggle. Like when I was trying to understand a new concept, I'd be like, I really want to understand this, but it's like I'm not understanding this right now, And I'd take my time with it and kind of, quote unquote, struggle with it until I understood it. And once I understood it, that was like the reward at the end. Because when you fully understand a concept, it's rewarding in a sense where if someone asks you a question, you can answer it simply. That's when you've kind of reached the tail end of that. Yeah.
You've got the whole carrot.
You've got now you've got the whole carrot. So that kind of, when he said it, I think it kind of reaffirmed in my head that no, I wasn't like wasting my time or something. Like that's kind of what learning is like and I experienced this as well when I started working. Again, the leap in logic as a structural engineer after having graduated to when you start working is immense.
I'm about to experience that.
Yeah, so prep, but it does get better after 2 or 3 years. It'll start to teeter off, and then you're like, oh, you can like finally breathe, because eventually you'll come to a point where you feel confident and like I can design this, and it's not like a dumb solution. Like like at the start, I was pretty green out of uni. You really need someone to kind of guide you through the designs. But like it's the same thing when you're first learning it, and you're first attempting it. It's always going to be a struggle. But then not too far off, it starts to get easier. So if you don't understand it in like a week, give yourself like a bit more time, because I think people overestimate what they can do in a short space of time. Yeah. But they always underestimate what they can do in like a matter of a year or 2 years. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I reckon. Yeah.
Just moving back to Hamid.
Sure. Yeah.
And let's pivot to
let's
your
go.
thesis. Actually,
sure.
Right?
Okay.
Or your PhD and all that. Actually, so you started your undergrad thesis with Hamid, actually, right?
Yeah.
and then you finished your PhD recently in like December.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that was on glue lam column buckling.
Steel.
We won't get too into that. But it was in the space of timber. And
correct. Yeah.
So what kind of drew you to, I guess, like having Hamid's as a supervisor and like his specialty
in timber engineering?
And how did you kind of go down the route of doing a PhD, I guess?
Yeah, it had to do with my research thesis. So my honors thesis was on timber engineering, and it came like the way I ended up with Hamid was one of like I was teaching. It was a structural analysis class, and I had like a co-demonstrator at the time, and she was doing her PhD, and she told me, if you're going to do your research thesis, you should like do it with Hamid. He's like a good teacher, you know. And I was like, oh, cool. What topics does he do? Timber. So, cut to end of the fourth year, finished my thesis with Hamid, graduated, and then when I started working, I had no intention to do a PhD. And it was Hamid actually who reached out and said that there was a scholarship available, you know, and he had sent it to me and like a couple of my friends as well. We were all students of his. And at the time, COVID was like I think it was getting way worse. It was like July 2020, you know, so it was really ramping up, lockdowns all in place, working from home a lot. And in the engineering industry as well, I think it was hard to pick up new work. So we were in the office, we were kind of, I wasn't put on very many projects. They were only, like projects would only like have a lot of senior people, not that many juniors. They were asking us to take leave. You know, it was a difficult time, I think, for the industry. And you know, we were asked to take leave. We hadn't accrued enough leave, so then it kind of pivoted to no pay leave and, you know, that sort of thing. And I mean, it wasn't just where I was working. A lot of my friends were working in other companies as well, echoing the same kind of thing. It was just a difficult time, I think, during COVID. And when Hamid approached me with this offer, I approached it more from a job security kind of perspective because I mean, he was very confident. He was like, you know, if you apply, like, you know, I'll guide you through the process of application. He was confident that I'd get it. Yep. And he said, and I found that interesting because I was like, oh, you know, I enjoyed working with Hamid when, you know, and his research group during undergrad. So I was like, he sounds good, but of course, there's very real implications of it. You know, it's a 3.5 year.
Yeah. Big commitment, right?
Commitment.
Yeah.
/4 years. If I don't go. So that's a big commitment. And I told myself, okay, I'll only do it if I'm allowed to work at the same time. So I double checked the rules, what I was allowed to do under the rules of the scholarship, spoke to Hamid about it. And at work, it was very easy to get the green light because they were asking us to take time off anyway. Okay. So if I was like, if I disappear for like, you know, if I'm working 3 days a week, is that okay? And they were like, sure, you know. But they were always really supportive, which, you know, props goes to them because I know of people who have tried to do something like that and they hadn't had very supportive people at work, and it does it does cause a lot of difficulty. But I got lucky, and that I still wasn't super convinced, and I think there came a point when I told myself, look, if I think I'll like it, let me just not think too much about the consequences of or what this means. Like, what does me doing a PhD mean? You know, like, am I going to use my PhD after? Like, a lot of that I tried to put aside, and I was just like, right now, it seems interesting. I think the research topic, which it was Hamid's idea, what the research topic was, I was like, that sounds interesting. If there's ever a time in my thesis, if there's ever a time in my life that I'm going to do a PhD, it's now. Probably never again after this. So I was like, sure, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, like, do you think it's harder for work to approve doing a PhD, or like the uni approving you doing work on the side?
From the uni's perspective, it's fine as long as, I think there's like a cutoff of like number of hours or something like that. So it's like 20 hours of work. So at the start, I remember I was doing like 2.5 days of work, you know, kept under that 20 hours. That's the rules of the scholarship that I was on. But apart from that, I think it's just a matter of, from the supervisor's perspective, it's a matter of, does it, is it okay? Are you struggling with the workload? At the end of the day, that's what they're concerned about.
Right.
So from the uni's perspective, it's fine if you're willing to put in the work, because if you're working and doing a PhD at the same time, you're not going to have very many hours left in the day. Like, it's a big commitment.
And for several years.
And for several years. It's like it's a marathon that's like a fast-moving marathon.
So it's like a sprint and a marathon. Like, it's a sprint
it's
that
both.
lasts as long as
it's a long-lasting sprint, yeah.
Oh,
and so
fantastic.
You kind of need supportive people around you, I think, during that time, because if not, it can get very, very difficult.
Yeah, it can kind of overwhelm you, I guess.
Totally. I'm certainly not the first one to work into a PhD. It won't be the last, but I've seen both sides of that, kind of equation. There are people who really excel because of certain conditions that they kind of kept going in their life, and then there are those that eventually give up the PhD and would just go back to work because it was too overwhelming. And I totally get that. Like, that's, it's hard, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think people generally don't have a very good idea of like the scholarships and stuff that come with doing a PhD.
Yeah.
Do you think it's financially viable and stuff? It's like, probably not really, but like.
Great question.
Yeah.
You mean doing a PhD? You mean while you're doing a PhD or after?
Oh, sorry. So like, basically, you get offered like grad roles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
As like one route, right? And then that's so much money.
Mm.
But then, in comparison, the option doesn't seem that good. Like doing a PhD in terms of pay. Like, that's what I feel like most people's opinion is.
Yeah. This is one of the things I kind of had to learn towards the tail end of my PhD. If you want the PhD, I guess, to really make a difference in terms of like how much you're getting paid, etc., then it's up to you really to sell yourself as having that extra skill set. Because especially in engineering, depending on what you're doing, that's not particularly a given. So give an example. If you're say a structural engineer, and you did a PhD and you came back and you continued working, doing the same jobs as an engineer,
but you have like a PhD this time.
But you have a PhD. Yeah. It actually works sometimes, not all the time. It actually works to your detriment. And I'll tell you why. Because when you're doing the PhD, you're part-time at work or less. Okay? And that means that your development is slower than everyone else's.
Sure.
And you have to be okay with that. Like, I remember people I started working with, and then as I started to do the PhD, they would go on to like more advanced projects. They're a lot more, I guess, useful to the engineering company, and I'm not.
Because you're only in for a couple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you think about it, it makes sense because they can't put you on very taxing projects that require you to be there 5 days a week, because you can't do that. They need to find smaller projects that have for you that kind of have like a timeline that kind of suits your availability, because on paper, yes, you can cut your time down to X number of days a week, and if they're okay with it, then that's fine. But the long-term impact of that is the types of projects you're working on changes, and of course, it depends. Company to company, of course. I can only speak from my experience at the time, post-COVID kind of era. But it definitely slows down your progression in the early stages. The other thing you've got to be mindful of is what you're doing in your PhD relevant to the work you're doing at work, the projects you're working on. If they're, and even in instructional engineering, I'll give an example. Like I did stuff that was timber related, but if after doing my PhD, I came back to work and I was just like the concrete person or the steel person, it was for naught. And well, it's not for naught, but your structural engineering career, doing those kinds of projects, wouldn't be directly benefited by a PhD. So what I found a lot of people were doing was, once they've graduated from their PhD, they either go to a company that does similar work in that space, or if their company had already is doing projects that would be beneficial from your expertise during the PhD. Either people in the leadership of the company recognize that and kind of tell you, so this is your path forward, or a lot more often than not, it was up to the students themselves to kind of have to pitch it as like valuable experience.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so you kind of have to keep selling yourself, I think, and you can reach a point where the PhD made sense in your career.
Yeah.
But it's I think you need to be a bit more on the ball for it as an engineer in industry compared to academia, because in academia it's all very well established and well understood.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I was going to ask you about that next. So, like, it's a bit of a divergent path after you finish your PhD, right?
Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about what it's like to return to the workforce right after doing PhD. But what happens if, say, you do want to continue academia, right? Like after PhD, like what kind of lifestyle is that like? You know, what kind of hours are you expecting, and like?
Right. You mean in
how
academia?
Is it? I guess, yeah.
Yeah, academia is extremely competitive, especially in I think the good the big universities. Like at UNSW is very competitive.
Yeah. And would you say that's true for Australia in general?
I mean, I don't really know.
Oh, actually, yeah.
Across Australia that well, but I know at big unis, like for example, like at UNSW or in UCID, even UTS would be the same. Macquarie would be the same. It's all very. It is extremely competitive. That's one. So I think scoring a gig in academia is
difficult.
It's not a super linear path unless I guess there's an opening in the space, and you're in the right place in the right time, or you're constantly looking.
Yeah.
Roles are more few and far between in academia than in industry, that's for sure. But so what oftentimes people do is after you get a PhD, they'll do a couple of years as a postdoc, where you're basically doing the same thing. You're doing research. You're publishing papers, basically. So you're kind of increasing the number of publications that you have, and then when you go and apply for a job as either a lecturer or researcher, it's your publications are your CV. And it's like how many publications do you have in reputable journals? That's the other thing. And based on that, and what's the impact factor of the research that you've been putting out? So have your papers been cited a lot? Because if you did something that's super interesting but your papers haven't been cited that much, then sometimes they can be like, they can ask you about that, But on the flip side, if a paper that you've written has been cited a lot, then that's a selling point. And then they're like, oh, okay, so this person, must be really reputable in their field. And then you go into, and then you can score a gig that way. But even the types of contracts changes. So for example, there's some lecturers in our uni who are on contract, and the contract expires at a particular point. So say it's like a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract.
Do they usually get it renewed, or to your knowledge?
Depends on the uni at the time. So it's not a given. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, which is tricky. Yeah, and I think like at UNSW anyway, I think in civil, to my knowledge, the way to get essentially like a full-time role in research would be if really there is a vacancy, which makes sense. X number of lecturers, that's what it is. Then if there is a vacancy, then you start looking. If not, then it can be a bit of an uphill battle, I think. But worth it if people want to be academics,
I think
they're
really passionate or something.
And I think to be an academic, you need to be passionate both about teaching and research.
Both,
both. Because the research really is the bread and butter of I guess your success in a career in academia. But if you're teaching in a university and not say a research institute, if you're teaching at a university, then you kind of have to love the teaching part as well. If not, I feel it might always show up as the bane of your existence. As it's part of one part of the job that you kind of
can't shake off.
Try not. I can't shake off.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But I think both are equally important.
I think at one point, you were telling me about that, in say for example UNSW, you have, and say within the civil school in UNSW, and say within the structural major of the civil school, you have people who specialize in different things, right? And then you can't always be working under them if you want to be like a lecturer.
Yeah.
So you start as a postdoc, and then you're working under one of the professors. Let's say Professor Hamid. You can't be a timber specialist while he's also the timber guy, right?
I think an easy way, I think can't might be too strong a word, because I've seen it happen, but it's more along the lines of, okay, academia and entrepreneurship are not too far apart, actually.
Entrepreneurship.
Yeah, like, and it's a weird way to put it, but
yeah.
I mean,
I've heard that analogy before, actually.
It's essentially you're think about it, you're sort of an independent contracted by the uni for your research. So it means that you need to be a specialist in a field, right? If you're working within a research group, and let's say you're a postdoc, then whoever's leading that research group, it's their research group, but you can think about it, it's analogous to it's their company, like, you know, they're running it, you know, and the uni would judges them, and the research community judges them based on their output, you know. So what sort of research outputs are they making? Are they making big strides in the field? You know, unfortunately or fortunately, and this is like another controversial part of the research community, is it somehow gets boiled down to a number of publications, etc.
It's like KPIs at work.
Yeah, exactly. and I wish there is a better way to distinguish good research from, you know, because then, like, giving a simple example of this would be, say, a particular piece of research took ages for you to do, and you did it, and it's out there.
But it only counts as one.
Counts as one publication, but of course, if it's a high impact publication, it's cited a lot, that makes sense. That's fine, right? But if it took a while to get traction, then, you know, that's the risk that you take as a researcher, to be like, this is what I want to research, you know. So I mean, that's why I say it's not unlike entrepreneurship, because you kind of are taking a bit of a risk when you decide this is what I want to specialize in. And that's why I think working in a research group is good, because it gives you that bit of padding and that bit of protection, right? And you can work under someone who has a really good idea of their field, and then eventually, but eventually, if you want to recreate that for yourself, you might need to kind of move into a new space. You kind of need to carve out a new space for yourself. You know? It's like owning a new bike shop next to another bike shop that's already super popular and no one's gonna buy from you. You know, like,
it's not a good business idea.
Exactly. Well, yeah. So and that's why I'm saying, I think that's the advice I got. Again, not to say you can't do it, like, you definitely can. Collaborations are a good idea. So if you've networked within the research community and you know what each person's doing, if you kind of like what that person's doing, but a slight tweak, you can collaborate with them and get, you know, exchange lessons learned and that kind of thing, and then kind of start working within your own field. And maintaining those connections and having that collaboration. I think that's a very good way forward. Yeah.
So it is somewhat collaborative, you know. As well.
It still is collaborative, yeah. But again, it's collaborative in the way two companies might do like a collab, like limited edition drop.
I've got an example as well. It's like a bookshop that also has a coffee shop working.
Exactly, yeah. So whoever's running the cafe, they're not going to be mad that you're selling more books.
Yeah.
Because you're not selling books, you're selling coffee.
Yeah.
but it works. But you both kind of need each other in a way. That I think that's the best way. But that's why I'm saying, and no one ever put it to me like this. But after having like kind of witnessed it for a while, it really is not too different from entrepreneurship in a way, because you are kind of running your own ship. As an academic. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Sure. And you just came back from overseas and all of that. I wanted to ask you, did you plan to stay in Australia, or was your career kind of looking to move abroad, or you're not too sure at the moment, I guess?
Yeah, I think the options for me now are a bit open. Yeah. Well, I kind of promised myself I'd take a break after a while.
Okay. Nice.
Like I said, because you're working and doing a PhD is taxing enough, and I think towards the tail end of my PhD, it did get very stressful. So towards the tail end of my PhD, I was just doing the PhD and I wasn't working. towards like I think the last 7 months or so. And so once that got finished, I kept telling myself, "Look, I'll take a break." And I don't think I kept telling myself, I don't think I'd stress myself out like that ever, because I think if you want to maintain like a good work-life balance, like all of those parts are important.
Yeah.
And I think I underestimated how important like time off was, and I struggled with that for like a long time. And there's some sacrifices you make doing that kind of thing. But anyway, so now I'm on my break.
Nice.
Living life.
Congratulations.
And
you deserve it.
And then wherever the job comes next is where I'll be it like either here or Singapore or elsewhere. Options are kind of open. I do want to spend a bit more time with family, so I'm back in Singapore a bit more now because I've been away from so many years. But then after that, it remains to be seen, which is scary and fun at the same time.
This one's a bit random as well, but I heard from Clarissa,
yes,
my friend, you wanted to be a pilot at one point.
I did, yeah. In fact,
so
that's why
this come into the equation.
That's why I struggled choosing engineering, because it wasn't initially what I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to be a pilot. I mean, I think it might probably will be something I'll do eventually, like at some stage. How exactly that comes together, I suppose this is the time that I kind of have a good think about and figure it out, because I haven't really had a lot of time to kind of sit back and kind of reflect, on where everything is going. Even the PhD was kind of like a side quest that, like I said, remember in the beginning, I mentioned that doing the PhD was like me thinking it's going to be fun, I'm going to enjoy it, it's going to be intellectually, stimulating for me. Yes, I want to do it. I never took the PhD thinking that it's going to show up at some stage in my career, thinking that it's going to help me, or it's kind of, I kind of just took it in the moment and be like, sure, like I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I had good fun, and I think we did good work as far as the research that a research group produced that I was a part of. That was fulfilling. Yeah. So now I think at this stage I'm kind of just taking it easy, and if I might stay in the engineering industry a bit more and then find my way there, or again, like I said, I'm just kind of taking my time to figure it out. But it's also the same advice I'd give everyone. If you've started in a particular field and there's something else that you really wanted to do, but you're kind of already knee deep in a particular field, like I would say, don't be too scared to kind of switch it up. And one of the things that really kind of affected me earlier on was when I was interning in a structural team. One of my managers at the time sat with me towards the end of my internship, and I asked him, why did you like structural engineering? And he said, I don't. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? Like, and he mentioned, he was like, I didn't really like it. I studied at uni, I started working, and now I've got a wife and 2 kids.
And he has to do it.
And and then he was like, well, what else am I going to do? And that scared me so much, because I was just like, so effective in like giving motivational advice to like not do what he did, but at the same time so scary. And I kind of left that conversation like promising myself I'd never find myself in that situation. So if I don't ever want to feel like I'm stuck to doing one thing, I'm kind of haphazard in like, I guess, that the things I want to do, and I'm at least by the time I'm old, whenever that is, I want to make sure that I've tried a bunch of different things, and
you don't regret it. I agree with that. Okay, thank you for all
cool.
the wisdom today, Prash.
Cheers, mate. I remember that was like towards the end of the list. I was like, okay, no, we are back.
It was towards the end of the list.
Yeah. Cheers, lads. Peace.
Oh, we did it.